Jim Acosta, he joins me now. He's the former chief White House correspondent for CNN. These days, he's an independent journalist. He's the host of the Jim Acosta Show on Substack, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. He's the author of the important book, The Enemy of the People, A Dangerous Time to Tell the Truth in America. And he's a former colleague of mine and an old friend. Jim, nice to see you, my friend. It's been many years since you and I have had a chance to talk on TV.
It has. It's great to see you again, Ali.
That was there was a lot in that clip, which is why I needed to play it. Because you did say enemy of the people, and that's the distinction, right? You are, whatever you want to call it, a thorn in the ass, thorn in the side, pain in the ass, whatever you want to call it. That's what your job is. Your job is to hold people to account. I had somebody tweet this morning to say, fine, you shouldn't be covering the White House. You should be covering regular people and covering what's going on in the street. But it's really important to hold leaders to account, no matter what country you're in.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Ali. I mean, I tell folks all the time, you know, the press, we're not the enemy of the people. We're defenders of the people. And we're here to hold their feet to the fire. And one of the reasons why Donald Trump behaves that way, he's still behaving that way, is because, one, he can't handle the hard questions. And two, there's just a part of him that thinks we, the people, don't have the right to ask these kinds of questions. And he's just wrong on both counts. And Ali, you've been doing this for a long time. You know what we have to do. We have a job to do, and we're going to continue to do it. And for the folks over at the White House right now, doing what we do for a living, I mean, my advice to them is to stand firm, stand your ground.
Yeah, you were writing about this exclusion of certain people from the pool, and most regular Americans are not really clear on what the pool does, why it's important. But it's this, you know, when you got to go into a small space like an airplane, or you're traveling with the president, or the Oval Office where all the reporters can't come in. We rely on these people. They're from different news organizations. You may not watch them on a regular basis. MSNBC viewers get information from a Fox reporter who's in the pool, because there's an agreement amongst you reporters that you will report the information accurately if you're part of that pool. When you remove people from that, you're taking control of something the state shouldn't have control over.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, look at what happened to me after that exchange you just played back in 2018. The White House at that time took my press pass away, and we had to take Donald Trump to court to get it back. And it was a Trump-appointed judge who gave it back to me. And, you know, I think that you might see the same sort of thing this time around. I mean, first of all, we have to say, you know, we're not the most popular people in the world. As you said, pain in the ass. I've been called lots of things, Ali. I'm sure you have as well. It goes with the territory. If you want to be liked, go be a veterinarian, as I like to tell folks. But, you know, listen, the press pool is a very important institution over at the White House. You have the networks, the television networks trading places every day as to who's going to be in the Oval Office, who's going to be on Air Force One with the president. You have print outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post. And then you have important institutions like the Associated Press, who have been kicked out of the Oval Office, kicked off of Air Force One, because they won't do something as silly as referring to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, something that Donald Trump just made up off the top of his head. I mean, you know, to me, we just shouldn't be in a situation where we're kicked out of the press pool because we won't succumb to the warped imagination of the wannabe autocrat in the Oval Office. And I was glad to see the Associated Press take him to court. And my guess is, in time, when this makes its way through the process, a judge, and perhaps it'll be a Trump-appointed judge, will say that the White House can't get away with this.
A lot of people get their news from sources that they don't know they're getting it from. So you just mentioned the wire services, Bloomberg, Reuters, Associated Press, putting aside the fact that many of us as journalists use the Associated Press as style guides for how we determine how we say things or what we put on the screen. But that stuff makes it into your local coverage without you actually knowing what the source of that reporting was. That's the danger here. It's not Donald Trump calling you and Peter Alexander rude and things like that, because at least that's out there in the open. It's this insidious removal of press passes, of access to the presidency. That's, I think, the more dangerous part. At least your stuff plays out in real life and people get to opine about whether they think Jim Acosta should get his press pass or not. But you're going to just see coverage disappear.
Yeah. No, there's no question about it. And listen, Ali, you and I both know all too well, the AP is a critical part of the free flow of information in American society. They have reporters in, I think, all 50 states. They have reporters in some 100 countries around the world. I think billions of people see their product, and they're a cooperative. It's not like they're out there making tons of money. They're here for the journalism. And keep in mind what took place the other day over at the White House, Ali. According to Andrew Feinberg of The Independent, the White House almost let a representative from the TASS Russian state media news agency into the pool spray and not the Associated Press or Reuters. And that was also confirmed by a Reuters reporter over there at the White House. And so what are we doing here in this country where you have the White House, you have press officials whose salaries are paid for with our tax dollars? They're letting in TASS, they're letting in the Russian media agency, but not the Associated Press. I mean, this is just lunacy. And it just goes back to, Donald Trump just having incredibly thin skin when it comes to taking the hard questions. He's just never been very good at it, Ali. And I think you and I are both are longtime observers of this. I think he wants the press to sort of function in the way that the tabloids did in New York when he was a real estate magnate in Manhattan. And that's just not how it works in Washington. We're here to dig. We're here to get information. We're here to ask the hard questions. And honestly, it's why the First Amendment is there. And he can't just throw that out the window willy-nilly and have just, fawning propagandists and sycophants in the Oval Office with him. I mean, imagine if you just had a bunch of people in the Oval Office with him asking questions like the guy the other day who was saying to President Zelensky, why didn't you wear a suit?
Yeah.
Imagine if you just had a handful of people doing that sort of thing. What would be the reaction from the American people? They would think this is like the Muppet Show or something. They would just find it to be sheer lunacy. It just wouldn't make any sense.
Or they get used to it over time. That's the danger, right? Because there are governments who do this, and then you get used to the idea that these press conferences are not press conferences; they're a parade of the achievements and accomplishments of the dear leader. Jim, let's talk about Friday and what happened in the White House with Zelensky. Ironically, you're one of those people who've been the subject of a very public thing in which Donald Trump decides that he's just going to go after someone in the way that he does. However, like you, Zelensky didn't seem to flinch much. The guy's been at war for 3 years, so I don't know that Donald Trump yelling at him or J.D. Vance yelling at him is the biggest deal. But experts tell me this may be an irreparable breach, that what happened on Friday is a rupture in a world order that we've been familiar with for 80 years.
Yeah, I mean, I did a podcast on this on Substack on Friday, wrote a piece about it over the weekend. I mean, Ali, I think watching what unfolded on Friday was a difficult moment, I think, for a lot of Americans. And because it's just not who we are. We're not the kind of country that turns its back on friends, turns its back on countries fighting for democratic freedoms. And that's exactly what took place in the Oval Office on Friday, to see Donald Trump and J.D. Vance berating Volodymyr Zelensky and accusing him of not thanking the United States, which, hello, fact check, he's thanked the United States dozens of times. All the time. He's done it publicly over and over again. And so, I mean, but it was almost like, and we're seeing this a lot during these early weeks of the second Trump administration, almost everything the president says or the vice president says or top administration officials say sounds like talking points over on Fox. It just comes out of the conservative, conspiracy theory laden ecosphere that just leads them down the path of sort of Alice in Wonderland stuff. And, it just felt like, Volodymyr Zelensky was pulled into that. He went down the rabbit hole with Trump and J.D. Vance. And this is somebody who has been courageously leading his country after it was invaded by the Russians. Yes, it was invaded by the Russians 3 years ago. And, that's what pained me almost the most in hearing that reporter asking Zelensky, why he wasn't wearing a suit. Like, hello, have you seen Elon Musk wearing his dark MAGA hat in the Oval Office? Did anybody have any questions about that? This is serious stuff, and you need serious people in the room asking real questions.
Yes, that might have actually been a saving moment when somebody gets a question like that, and it's a real question that holds the leaders to account as opposed to a stupid question about why he's not wearing a suit. I want to read from what you wrote on Substack about this. It's titled, "This is Not Who We Are." Trump's shameful repudiation of Zelensky was much more than an embarrassing moment in American diplomacy, on par with the president's disgraceful embrace of Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. It was not just a televised excommunication of a key U.S. ally fighting for its survival. This was a signal across the oceans that the United States of America, proud home of the greatest generation that stormed the beaches of Normandy to defeat the Nazis, was no longer in the business of saving the world. Instead, Trump will trade vague offers of security for the natural resources of vulnerable, weaker nations, rare earth minerals in the case of Ukraine. This is there's two parts of the disappointment. One is the world order that's breaking, but the second is American pride. We may not have gotten it right since the storming of Normandy, but Americans have tried. They've tried to be a leader of the free world. It feels like on Friday, we almost stopped trying.
Yeah, and it felt like just the ship was sailing off into uncharted waters. We're not going to be there for Europe anymore. I mean, what is that? What is that? Is that the truth? Because if you talk to a lot of experts about this, people like Ann Applebaum and so on, that leads to war in Europe. If the United States is just going to let the Russians roll into Kyiv and take over that country, obviously Vladimir Putin is not going to stop there. He's going to want to poke and prod in other parts of Europe and maybe even tempt the NATO alliance to push back if he goes into one of the Baltic states, one of the weaker nations in the Baltic states. And so, to me, it is playing with fire. And, maybe they will put the pieces back together again. Perhaps they'll get this deal going again. It sounds as though the Brits, the French are trying to get Trump and Zelensky back at the negotiating table. But what took place on Friday almost felt like a stunt. And a lot of people are saying maybe it was a stunt. This was just Trump playing to the cameras. Yeah. And so if you're in a situation like that, if you're Zelensky, how do you negotiate in a situation like that? It is very, very difficult. And I know, Ali, you've done some great reporting over in Ukraine. To think about what the people of that country have gone through over the last 3 years and to see the president just repudiate their leader in the way that he did, it must be just incredibly disheartening. And it raises a lot of worries as to what's to come.
Jim, it's nice to see you again, my friend. Thank you. Jim Acosta is former chief White House correspondent, an old colleague of mine and a friend.